I knew I wasn't really invited. It was my mother's birthday dinner held at this ridiculously overpriced steakhouse downtown that she didn't even like. But it had valet service crystal glasses and lighting so dim, you could almost mistake her for a movie star. That was the point. She invited the usual suspects' cousins who still called her Queen J aunts who lived for drama, and two women I'd never seen before who were clearly there to fill chairs and praise her latest reinvention. As for me, I wasn't invited. I was expected. Same with the bill. My name's Aaron, by the way. I'm 34. And that night was the last time I let them treat me like I was just a wallet with legs. I showed up late. Not on purpose, but also not on purpose. When I walked in, they were already halfway through appetizers. My sister Leah barely glanced up from her phone thumb, still mid-scroll like I'd interrupted something crucial. My father, Greg, didn't even look up. And Mom. She gave me this lazy two-finger wave, like I was the valet. I took a seat at the end of the table. 12 people total, 4 I recognized. The rest randoms she probably handpicked for their ability to compliment her without blinking. Dinner dragged. I said almost nothing. Leah launched into this monologue about her wine lifestyle blog like it was the next Amazon, despite not making a dime off it. Dad made his usual passive-aggressive remarks whenever I brought up my company. Something about real jobs and people who don't just type all day. And Mom? She smiled like she was on a talk show, nodding at compliments, raising her glass, soaking it in. Then came the toast. Dad stood, clinked his glass. Everyone hushed like he was about to drop some Shakespearean tribute to love and longevity. He looked at Mom with this practiced smile. I expected something corny. To my beautiful wife or to many more years. Nope. To a new beginning, he said. Starting today, we're no longer a family. It was so quiet I could hear the clink of forks dropping. At first, I thought it was a joke, some weird metaphor about change or healing or whatever, but he wasn't kidding. People clapped. Not loud, just enough to make it real. Leah even muttered, finally under her breath. I looked at Mom. She didn't seem confused or shocked, just still, like this had been planned. I laughed, couldn't help it. That sort of quiet, stunned giggle that slips out when something in your brain just breaks. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the keys. The black Escalade I bought them last year still shiny in their driveway. I set the keys on the table. I guess you won't be needing this anymore. Dead silence. Dad's smirk vanished. Mom's wine glass hovered in midair. Leah blinked like she was buffering. I wasn't done. I pulled out my phone, opened the joint trust account I'd created to help out over the years. The one that covered their mortgage, Leah's rent, and those mysterious recurring charges labeled Wellness Retreat. Then I closed it. One tap, zeroed out. Done. The room turned cold. Leah finally spoke. That's it. I nodded. Yeah, that's it. She laughed sharp and fake like she thought there was a punchline coming. There wasn't. Not this time. About 30 minutes later, I found her behind one of those tacky privacy curtains the restaurant uses to make drama look exclusive. She was on the phone screaming. Her eyeliner was smudged. Her coat was halfway off like she'd tried to leave and forgot how. You can't do this, she snapped when she saw me. You don't know what you're doing. You're ruining everything. I didn't respond. I just left. That was the line in the sand. What they didn't know was I'd already stepped over it. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a hotel downtown and sat in the bar watching basketball I didn't care about. Phone on silent, whiskey in hand. By the time I turned my phone back on, I had 17 missed calls. 8 from Leah, 4 from Mom. The rest. Unknown numbers, probably relatives who only remember my name when the money stops flowing. The next morning, I drove to my house. Not the one I paid their bills from. The one I actually lived in, where they hadn't stepped foot in over a year ever since I stopped hosting holidays because they kept bringing Tupperware to steal leftovers. I made coffee, turned on the news. Peaceful, quiet. Then the doorbell rang. It was my cousin Rhea. Full makeup, coat still buttoned. Holding a box of pastries like this was just a casual Tuesday drop-by. She said she just wanted to talk, that she wasn't picking sides, that people were calling her and she needed the truth. So I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. She told me everything. Apparently, this no longer a family thing wasn't spontaneous. Dad and Mom had been planning it for weeks. They told everyone I was manipulating them, that I was financially abusive, that I used guilt to control them. They'd framed it like some grand act of reclaiming independence. They just didn't expect me to call their bluff. They thought I'd sulk, maybe storm out, maybe post a dramatic status update, but they never thought I'd actually shut the money off. or take the car back, or erase the account they depended on. Because deep down they believed I needed them to keep playing the game. Ria said Mom called her around midnight in tears not because I cut them off, but because she couldn't access one of the accounts she used to book her post-birthday spa trip. That one? Yeah, also under my name. Oops, that alone would have been satisfying, but of course it wasn't over. 2 days later I got served, at work, a formal lawsuit. Mom and Dad were suing me for financial abuse of elderly dependents. I almost laughed right there in the HR office. They accused me of coercion, said I exploited them through guilt and expectation. They framed every dollar I gave, every bill I paid as blackmail. The cherry on top, Leah joined the circus. She emailed my company's general inbox with accusations of harassment, sent screenshots of texts like, "You left your charger here," said it was evidence of me obsessively monitoring her. I didn't respond, but I started gathering my own receipts, screenshots, bank records, voicemails of Mom begging for rent, drunken calls from Dad asking for help covering the second mortgage he secretly took out for Leah's condo. Yeah, I kept everything. And just when I thought the plot had hit its peak, Ria posted a TikTok. Just her, sitting on her bed, talking about what financial abuse really looks like. When your cousin gets cut off for no longer being the family's ATM after 10 years. It blew up. 500,000 views in 24 hours. She didn't use names, but people pieced it together. Leah's wine empire started bleeding followers. Sponsors bailed. She deleted half her content in a week. The lawsuit. Withdrawn. But the silence that followed, that was the real beginning. Because they weren't done. And neither was I. They thought silence would make me flinch. That if they just went quiet long enough, I'd start to doubt myself. Maybe even apologize. But the thing about people who fake power is they never realize how much of it isn't actually theirs. I didn't wait. The car was already gone sold within the week, but I didn't pocket the money. I used it to buy a decade-old Civic in cash, had it delivered to their driveway with a massive red bow and a card that said, "Let's see how free you really are." I never got a thank you. I never expected one. But they didn't send it back either, and that said enough. Next, I shut down the family phone plan. It used to be under my name for convenience, but now it was just leverage. Apparently, none of them realized how deeply they relied on that number. Leah lost access to every single one of her accounts, Instagram business email, even her so-called blog backend. Mom couldn't get into her Gmail. Dad missed 3 golf games because nobody could reach him. 3 days later, I sent Leah an old screenshot she'd forgotten. Existed a message from 2 years ago where she begged me to help her register her LLC because legal forms made her anxious. That one hit harder than expected. Then came the house. Their precious 4-bedroom monument to upper-middle-class illusions. The mortgage, I'd co-signed it years ago because Dad's credit looked like a financial crime scene, and Mom swore she couldn't bear to lose the house we built memories in. I'd structured the paperwork with a clause my lawyer insisted on: if either party severed familial ties publicly, the agreement could be dissolved and repayment accelerated. The moment Dad stood up and announced the end of our family, that clause activated. The clock started ticking. 30 days. Full repayment. Or foreclosure. The panic didn't take long. Mom called first, left a voicemail that started soft, then cracked halfway through. Said I was being cruel, that I was punishing them for loving me too much. I didn't reply. Then Dad showed up at my office. My assistant buzzed me confused. Said there was a man downstairs yelling about betrayal and bloodlines. I told her to call security. As they escorted him out, he turned to the camera and flipped it off. I clipped the footage and texted it to him with the caption, "New family portrait." He didn't reply either. Leah was next. She tried to be clever. Texted from a different number like I wouldn't recognize her tone. "I can't log into anything. This isn't funny." I ignored it. She tried again a day later. "I have deals writing on this. Please." I sent her a link to the refund policy of a digital marketing course. No context. Just that. After that, she went quiet too. For a while, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally absorbed the message. That the air had changed enough for them to realize I wasn't bluffing. But then Ria called again, said she wanted to have dinner. Just her Lily and a few of the cousins. No drama, no surprise interventions. I hesitated, but curiosity won. When I walked in, I didn't expect what they'd prepared. A scrapbook, not the cutesy kind with glitter and stickers. This was meticulous, old birthday cards. Photos from when I was a kid. Notes I wrote in elementary school. Tucked between those pages were copies of emails and texts my extended family had been trading for years. Private messages warning each other about how entitled Mom had become. How Leah bragged about getting me to pay her rent without ever asking. One email from Dad literally said errands our early retirement. They all signed the last page, a handwritten note that said they were sorry, that they saw it happening, that they didn't say anything because they were afraid to rock the boat. It didn't undo the damage, but for the first time in years I felt something close to understood. Still, I wasn't done. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was after truth. I took every document I had, bank transfers, messages, account logins, receipts, and assembled a full report. I sent it to the IRS. No name on the envelope. Just clean chronological evidence that 3 people had been living off unreported income for over a decade while claiming zero taxable revenue. Let them explain how they traveled twice a year, lived in a $500K house, and paid no taxes. It wasn't about punishment, it was about accountability. A few weeks later, the ripple started to spread. First, Mom stopped posting on Facebook. That might not sound like much, but this is a woman who used to go live to narrate herself cleaning out her spice rack. Now nothing, no vague quotes, no wine selfies, just digital silence. Dad tried to sell the golf clubs I bought him a few birthdays ago. I know because he listed them under a burner Craigslist account and used their home Wi-Fi. My friend James, who works in cybersecurity, traced the IP address just for laughs. We spent half an hour cackling at the listing title barely used. Great condition. No longer needed. Honestly, same. But the real shift happened on a Tuesday. Lily texted me, "Are you free tonight?" "There's a meeting. It's time." I had no idea what she meant. When I arrived at her apartment, I walked into something I hadn't seen since childhood unity. 10 relatives sat in her living room. All quiet. All waiting. Aunt Mia, Uncle Josh, Cousin Rachel, even Great Aunt Alma, who hadn't left her house in months. They weren't there to gossip. They were done. Apparently, after I pulled the plug, Mom and Dad panicked and started turning on everyone. They told one relative that Aunt Mia had stolen jewelry from the house. Lied. Told another that Uncle Josh was unstable and needed medication. Tried to get Lily fired by emailing her boss saying she was spreading family rumors online. It nearly worked. That's when the rest of them said enough. Aunt Mia had a folder, no joke a real one, with screenshots, bank statements, even copies of forged loan documents Dad used years ago in Grandpa's name. She pushed the folder toward me and said, "We want to burn them down, but clean, with proof. You know how." I didn't say yes right away. I wanted to do it right. The next morning, I called in a favor from a forensic accountant I'd worked with for a previous audit. I told her I needed full financial tracing on 20 years of questionable transactions. She didn't even blink. Asked for names. When I gave them, she paused and said, "Oh, I've heard of them." Turns out my parents had tangled with someone in her firm years ago. She said she'd take the case pro bono, just for the fun of it. That's when I knew this wasn't personal anymore. It was systemic. It started with a letter, not digital, not an email, a real, certified letter sent from the IRS. Uncle Josh had a friend in the mailroom who tipped us off. It landed on their doorstep Thursday morning. By Thursday night, Mom had called half the family sobbing about some administrative mix-up. Nobody answered. Over the weekend, she tried a soft reboot, logged into an old Instagram account and posted a photo of a sunrise and a Bible verse. The caption said, "Those who judge will be judged." Aunt Mia commented, "Start packing." By the following week, Rachel had contacted the mortgage lender with the documents we found. Turns out Dad had forged 2 co-signers, one of them being Grandpa, who'd already been dead 3 years when the form was dated. The bank launched an investigation. Leah tried to stay quiet but couldn't help herself. She posted a cryptic story, black screen, white font, betrayal cuts deepest when it's family. Someone screenshotted it. The comments were brutal. That was when Lily released her video. 10 minutes. No names. Just a painfully honest walkthrough of what financial abuse looks like. 500,000 views in 2 days. Sponsors backed out of Leah's deals. Her inbox flooded. Someone found an old video of her laughing about how easy it was to get her big brother to pay rent without noticing. She deleted her channel by Friday. I didn't say a word online. I didn't need to. The truth was finally speaking for itself. After Leah disappeared offline after the documents started circulating and the mortgage probe got real, the air changed. You could feel it. Not dramatic like thunder, more like when the wind shifts before a storm. People stopped pretending. Nobody called to check in. No one sent vague thinking of you texts hoping I'd offer reassurance. Instead, they waited, like the whole family had turned into an audience at a play they couldn't admit they were part of. The funny part, I didn't care. Not anymore. The guilt they used to weaponize wasn't working. And with every silence, every absence, it got easier to breathe. Until one day, out of nowhere, Dad tried a new approach. A delivery driver showed up at my place with an envelope. No note. Just my name written in his exact handwriting. Inside was a check for $10,000 along with 5 handwritten pages of what I assume was meant to be an apology. The last page wasn't even finished, like he got tired halfway through pretending to reflect. I stared at that check for maybe a minute tops before folding it back up and slipping it into the folder with the rest of the evidence. Whether it was guilt or fear didn't matter. He wasn't sorry. He was just trying to beat the fallout. It didn't work. If anything, that move confirmed what I already knew: they weren't fighting back anymore, they were drowning. Aunt Mia started getting calls again, blocked numbers, voice messages from Mom, that swung between fake calm and panicked sobbing. "We didn't know it would go this far," she said in one of them. "We're family. You don't burn family." But that's the thing. They lit the match. I just stopped pretending it wasn't smoke. Then came the final reunion. Not a party, not a celebration, just one long backyard table at Aunt Mia's house. She called it a gathering, but it felt more like a trial with wine. Everyone was invited, even them. I didn't think they'd show, but they did. Mom showed up in some cocktail dress like it was a gala. Leah wore sunglasses like the paparazzi were hiding behind the grill. Dad looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Nobody said a word when they arrived, just shifted in their seats like a storm cloud had entered the yard. Aunt Mia opened the conversation. No script, no hesitation, just truth. She laid out what we'd found. The documents, the lies, the years of manipulation buried under fake affection. She didn't yell. She didn't dramatize it. She just passed around the folder one by one. Refinance forms with forged cosigners, SORs, trust transfers. Screenshots of Mom and Leah coordinating stories to justify why they deserved more from Grandpa's estate. Nobody interrupted, not even them. Then Rachel stood up, quiet but steady. She read a list of every family member who'd loaned money to Mom or Dad or been guilted into covering something over the last decade. The list took nearly 7 minutes. Nobody interrupted her either. Leah kept her sunglasses on. Mom clutched her wine glass like it was a life raft. Then Lily stood and played a voicemail, her phone on speaker, clear as day. It was Leah talking to a friend, laughing. "Aaron's just a doormat with a wallet. If he ever cuts us off, I'll cry long enough for someone else to pay the rent." The silence after that wasn't just awkward. It was surgical. No one looked at her, not even Mom. Leah didn't defend herself. She just got up and walked to the far end of the yard like the audio hadn't been hers. Finally, it was my turn. But I didn't make a speech. No anger, no buildup. Just a small envelope that I handed across the table. One for Mom, one for Dad, one left at Leah's empty seat. Inside, legal statements already filed formally ending any financial, legal, or emotional obligation. They weren't just cut off, they were cut out. Mom looked at the first page and asked if I was serious. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Dad didn't ask anything. Just stared at the grass like it held the answers. Leah never came back to the table. And still, no one clapped. No one cheered. It wasn't a victory lap. It was closure. The kind that doesn't explode but settles into your bones. And then came the real surprise. Aunt Mia stood up and announced what she'd been quietly working on with the probate attorney. Grandpa's house, the one Mom always swore she'd inherit, the one she claimed she deserved more than anyone else, was being turned into a family trust. But with rules this time, not for people who show up when there's money, only for those who contribute, who show up emotionally or financially or with time. No more freeloaders. No more blood is thicker excuses. It was about values now, community, healing. And Mom. She didn't qualify. Neither did Dad. Or Leah. For once, being family by blood wasn't enough. You had to act like it. When we started to eat, when plates were passed and people started talking again, Mom sat frozen, envelope still unopened on the table. Dad eventually stood up, didn't say a word, and walked out through the side gate. Leah followed a few minutes later, eyes down, shoes clicking against the stone. No goodbye, no argument, just silence, and that silence said everything. I stayed, helped with cleanup, told stories I hadn't thought about in years, laughed in a way I hadn't in longer than that. And as the sun dipped below the trees, something shifted. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was peace. And peace was enough for now. Later that night, I got a message from an old friend of Leah's, someone I barely knew. Just 2 lines. She's spiraling. They all are. Just so you know. I didn't answer. Didn't even open the thread. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. About all of us who'd been used and bent and reshaped into something convenient. And that version of me, he was gone. Replaced by someone who no longer had to choose between loyalty and survival. Someone who finally chose himself. In the weeks that followed the backyard reckoning, the dust didn't exactly settle. It just shifted into new corners. They didn't reach out again, not directly. No more blocked calls, no more fake apologies taped to envelopes. But I could still feel them trying to maneuver behind the scenes, poking at loose threads to see if any part of the web would still hold. They weren't fighting for redemption. They were scrambling for survival, and it showed in all the ways they tried to rewrite history without actually saying a word. Leah deactivated every platform that had once been a stage for her curated, borrowed life. Her blog URL redirected to a broken landing page. Her business email bounced back with a generic error. A few people asked me if I knew what happened to her. I said I didn't, and even if I had, I wouldn't have answered. Because the truth was, the moment she walked out of that backyard, she stopped being someone I owed explanations to. Mom, however, couldn't help herself. She resurfaced through other people's soft entries like a relative's prayer circle or a mutual's charity auction. Always the same script. That she missed her family. That forgiveness was godly. That mistakes shouldn't define a person. What she never said was what those mistakes were. She wanted grace without confession, an apology without the uncomfortable truth. And the thing is, some people gave it to her. Not many, but a few relatives with short memories and soft boundaries started testing the water. One even texted me something like, maybe it's time to move on. She's still your mother. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had already moved on. She just wasn't coming with me. But what she didn't expect and what I knew she feared was the second ripple effect. Because once a lie cracks in one place, it doesn't stop there. And what Mom and Dad never understood was that their mess wasn't just about me. They had spent decades building a system, a whole ecosystem of emotional IOUs and quiet manipulations that touched everyone. So when my cousins saw the fallout and realized they weren't alone in what they'd felt, they started digging too. And what they found? That's when things started to break in places I didn't even touch. Uncle Josh uncovered a temporary loan he gave Dad 7 years ago that had mysteriously turned into a permanent debt without paperwork. Aunt Carla realized Mom had been quietly using her social security number for a failed credit line back in 2015. No identity theft charges yet, but enough to send up red flags and freeze accounts. Cousin Ella found out she was co-signer on a private student loan Leah had taken for a nutrition certification she never even finished. The more they searched, the more rot they found. It was like termites in the foundation. Everything looked solid until you pressed on it. And once exposed to light, it collapsed fast. At one point, I got a call from James, the same cousin who'd helped trace Dad's Craigslist listing. He said, "You lit the fuse, man." But this house was already packed with dynamite, and I believed him. Because no matter how far I stepped back, it kept blowing open wider. The IRS investigation by then had moved past quiet paperwork into actual interviews. Not with me, I was clean. But I heard through Rhea that Dad had to sit down with an auditor. Apparently, he tried to charm his way through it. Said he was misunderstood. Said it was a few innocent oversights. But when asked why a man with no official employment for over a decade was still making payments on a premium golf club membership, he froze. The agent asked for documentation. None existed. That was the beginning of the real unraveling. By the time autumn rolled around, I barely recognized the landscape. Mom and Dad's house was up for sale not by choice, but by court order. The mortgage acceleration clause had triggered a cascade of unpaid penalties, and once the cosign clause was enforced, the bank didn't hesitate. The official listing didn't mention the drama, just motivated sellers and price to move. I saw the photos online. They'd staged it, of course. Neutral tones, fake plants, a cozy throw blanket draped over the couch, like it was ever a home. But I saw the ghosts in every photo: the kitchen where I signed their first check, the hallway where Leah cried after getting her first overdraft warning, the spare bedroom they made me sleep in every holiday, even though I paid for the roof. It was all dressed up like nothing had happened, but everything had. I didn't go to the open house, I didn't drive by, but I did get a call from the realtor. She thought I was still a co-owner. I wasn't. Not anymore. I let her talk, listened to her pitch like I was just another buyer. And then calmly, I told her she might want to double-check the lien disclosures. Because while I wasn't interested in buying, I'd made sure every unpaid favor had a paper trail, and that trail was public record now. Meanwhile, the rest of the family had begun to rebuild something new. Not perfect, not drama-free, but honest. The kind of honest that doesn't flinch when someone says no. Aunt Mia started hosting monthly dinners again. Not big, just enough to remind us that family can feel like safety when it's earned. Lily, who had been so quiet for most of her life, started working on a community podcast about generational abuse and financial trauma. The first episode was about guilt as currency. She didn't mention names. She didn't have to. It was already understood. As for me, I found myself doing something I hadn't in years: resting, not just physically, mentally. I stopped checking my phone for emergencies that weren't mine. I stopped waiting for apologies I knew would never come. I picked up painting again, just small stuff. Acrylics on canvas in my spare room. Sometimes when I couldn't sleep, I'd pull out a half-finished piece and just let my mind slow down. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It felt earned. But even peace needs maintenance. Because trauma doesn't just leave, it lingers. Shows up when you least expect it. Like when I was grocery shopping and heard someone laugh the way Mom used to. Or when I scrolled past an old photo from Leah's birthday and felt that weird ache in my chest. The kind that whispers maybe things could have been different, but they weren't. And trying to rewrite the past only delays the present. So I honored the ache and moved through it. That's what healing looks like sometimes. Not a clean break, but a quiet decision every single day to not go back. One night, about 3 months after the reunion, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo album. Old pictures. Real ones. Printed, not digital. Most of them were of me. Childhood birthdays, school plays, graduations. Stuff I didn't even remember existing. Tucked inside the back cover was a note. In Mom's handwriting. Just 6 words. You were the best of us. I stared at it for a long time. Not angry, not sad, just still. Because by then I understood. That wasn't an apology, that was her goodbye. And maybe in her own twisted way, it was the best she could do. After the photo album arrived, I left it sitting on my kitchen counter for a week. I didn't open it again, didn't look through it, didn't try to decode her handwriting or wonder if it was sincere. I let it sit there like the ghost it was, a relic of a story I no longer wanted to retell. I knew what it represented. Not love, not regret. Just an echo of something that used to hold weight but now felt as light as dust. And honestly, I was tired of turning everything into meaning. Sometimes closure isn't about getting answers. It's just about deciding to stop asking. Life didn't pause while I processed. It moved forward like it always does. I started taking longer walks, started sleeping better, started realizing that peace isn't loud. It's the absence of noise you forgot you were carrying. I stopped checking their socials not because I wasn't curious, but because it didn't matter anymore. If they were happy, good for them. If they weren't, that wasn't my responsibility either. I'd already handed back every burden they ever draped across my shoulders. But peace, I've learned, doesn't mean immunity. It means resilience. Because when you finally take your life back, there's always someone waiting to see if you'll hand it over again. And in my case, that someone came wearing a familiar face. It was Leah. She showed up unannounced, standing outside my building with a tote bag and sunglasses, like this was a casual visit, not an ambush. My building has a secure entry, but she waited by the mailbox, pretending to scroll through her phone until someone let her in. By the time my buzzer rang, she was already halfway up the stairs. I didn't let her in right away. I stood at the peephole for a solid 30 seconds watching her shift her weight from foot to foot like she wasn't sure if she was here to beg or accuse. When I finally opened the door, she smiled like nothing had happened. "Hey," she said, like we'd just spoken yesterday. I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let her walk in. She looked around like she was trying to find proof of struggle, like she needed to confirm I wasn't thriving without her. We sat at the kitchen table, same one where Ria told me about the lawsuit, same one where I signed the documents cutting ties. She pulled out her phone, opened a spreadsheet, and started talking numbers. Apparently, she'd been trying to rebuild her online presence but couldn't secure any deals because her reputation was still too volatile. She said it like it was just an unfortunate market trend, not a direct consequence of her own actions. Then she asked if I'd be willing to publicly clarify some things. Said it wouldn't need to be dramatic, just a short statement that the lawsuit had been a misunderstanding, that the family issues were behind us, that we'd all moved on. I stared at her. Not angry, not surprised, just hollow. Because this wasn't about healing. It was a rebrand, a marketing pitch. She wanted forgiveness in the form of a statement she could attach to a sponsorship email. I asked her why she thought I'd do that. She paused, looked down at her lap and said, "Because we're family." I think I actually smiled. Not a sarcastic one. A real tired smile. I told her I wished her well. Then I stood up and opened the front door. She didn't argue. Just picked up her bag and walked out like this was the ending she'd expected all along. A few days later, the ripple reached Mom. I don't know if Leah told her what happened or if she'd been tracking my life through someone else, but out of nowhere, I got a letter in the mail. Not handwritten this time, typed, formal, like she was applying for permission to exist in my life again. She said she'd been speaking with a therapist, that she understood now how her actions may have caused harm, that she regretted the way things unfolded but hoped we could find a new path forward. She used words like reflection, restoration, and reconciliation. Big polished words. Words that sound honest if you don't know what's hiding behind them. But I did. Because tucked inside the letter was a second page, a financial breakdown. Her projected expenses for the year, her estimated shortfall. And a note at the bottom asking if I'd be willing to consider a temporary stipend to help her transition into a more stable chapter. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and dropped it straight into the shredder. Not out of spite, out of clarity, because there it was. Her version of healing. Process your pain, then pay me for mine. The final twist didn't come from any of them. It came from the bank. One morning, I got an alert about a flagged transaction. It was tied to the old trust account I'd shut down months ago. Somehow, someone had tried to reactivate it using an outdated login. Not smart enough to work, but sloppy enough to leave a trail. I followed it. Turns out Leah had used an old laptop that still had residual autofill data. She must have figured out the bank's backend hadn't fully deleted the inactive structure and thought she could reroute a few deposits. Maybe she figured I wasn't paying attention anymore. Maybe she thought time would have softened me. What she didn't realize was that I'd set up alerts for that very reason. I forwarded the attempted access log to my attorney. Within a week, she received a cease and desist letter and a formal warning that any further attempts would be pursued under fraud statutes. She didn't reply. She didn't try again. By that point, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not revenge, just distance. A calm, spacious kind of detachment. Like I was finally on the other side of something I'd been pushing against for years without even knowing it. It wasn't about punishing them anymore. It wasn't even about justice. It was about alignment, about making sure that the peace I'd fought for stayed intact. That it wasn't another temporary comfort waiting to be dismantled by guilt or nostalgia. I started hosting dinners of my own, not big ones. Just a few people once a month, cousins, friends, neighbors, people who showed up with nothing to gain and everything to share. We'd cook, we'd talk, we'd laugh. No drama, no emotional landmines, just real connection. Sometimes we'd talk about the past, not to dwell, just to mark how far we'd come. Other times we didn't talk about it at all. We just lived. And in those moments, I realized something powerful. That healing isn't loud. It's not some cinematic scene with music swelling and tears falling. It's quiet. It's in the way your shoulders drop when you walk into your own home. It's in the way your phone doesn't buzz with dread anymore. It's in the way you start dreaming again. One night after everyone had left, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. The window above the sink was open, and I could hear the wind rustling through the trees. It reminded me of something from years ago, a sound I used to notice before life got so heavy. I stood there for a long time listening, not thinking, just being. And in that silence, I felt it. The weight finally gone, not shifted, not redistributed, gone. And I knew deep in my bones that they couldn't touch me anymore, not because I'd built walls, but because I'd built something better, a life they weren't part of and never would be again. Time moved differently after that night at the sink. It stopped feeling like something I was racing against or trying to escape from. It just was. Steady, quiet, honest. I started to realize how much of my life had been spent performing calm instead of living it. How many years I'd lost trying to buy peace through silence, trying to earn respect from people who measured worth by what I could give them, never by who I was. But now, with the noise behind me, I could finally hear myself again. Not the version of me shaped by obligation or guilt, but the one I used to catch glimpses of when I was younger. The one who liked early mornings and long drives with no destination. The one who didn't apologize for asking to be treated like a human being. One morning, I drove out to the edge of town just for the hell of it. No GPS, just instinct. I ended up at this old public park I hadn't been to in years. The kind of place we used to go as kids for 4th of July picnics before the family fractured into factions. I sat on a bench by the duck pond with a coffee in hand and watched the water ripple like it had its own story to tell. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted. I didn't feel like I was being watched or judged or secretly resented. I just felt present, whole, like I belonged to my own life again. Around the same time, Lily texted me. She was finishing up her second podcast series. The new theme was about reclaiming narratives, how people trapped in toxic families rewrite their own stories without waiting for permission. She asked if I wanted to be part of the final episode. Not as a guest, as a voice, a perspective. I hesitated at first, not because I wasn't ready, but because I wasn't sure what I had left to say, but she said something that stuck with me. She said, "You don't owe them silence anymore. You owe yourself truth." That's when I knew. This wasn't about revenge. It never really was. It was about reclaiming the power of my own name, my own memory, my own choices. So I recorded a voice memo. Just a few minutes. No script, no edits. I talked about what it felt like to grow up as the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who learned to fix problems he didn't cause. I talked about what it cost me to carry their shame as if it were mine. I ended it with one sentence. Sometimes healing means walking away without looking back. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to go. The episode went live on a Tuesday. By Friday, it had over 200,000 listens. I didn't read the comments. I didn't need validation. But I did get a message from someone unexpected. Aunt Denise. The one who hadn't spoken up during the reunion but had always been kind to me when I was a kid. Her message was short. She said, "I wish I'd said something sooner. I see it now. I see you." That was all. And somehow it meant more than any apology from Mom ever could. Months passed. The house sold. Last I heard, they moved into a rental 2 towns over. Nothing flashy, no granite countertops or double-door fridges, just basic walls and carpet and the sound of their own echoing consequences. Leah stayed offline. Word got around that she'd taken a job at a boutique wine shop, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions about failed brands or viral scandals. Mom tried to start a new blog under a different name. It didn't last. The internet forgets fast, but not that fast. And Dad? Well, I assume he still plays golf, just not at the club I used to pay for. They tried once more, not together, separately. First, Mom sent a birthday card, not handmade, not heartfelt, just store-bought with a single line scribbled inside, "Hope life's treating you well." No return address, no apology, just her way of trying to pretend we'd never hit detonate on the lie we used to call family. I didn't reply. Then Dad emailed me. Subject line, "Can we talk?" I read it. Then archived it. I wasn't angry. I just didn't care anymore. Because some things don't need a response. Some things are better left in the inbox of the past. Eventually, the court finalized the estate redistribution. Grandpa's savings, once quietly funneled into suspicious accounts, was reassigned based on new forensic evidence. Aunt Mia now oversees the trust. It funds educational programs, caregiving support, and small grants for any relative contributing to the family's well-being in tangible ways. The rules are simple. No one is entitled to help. You earn it by showing up, by contributing, by caring, the way it should have always been. And as poetic as it sounds, I never applied. Not because I wasn't eligible, but because I didn't need it. Knowing it exists, knowing it was built from the ashes of what they tried to destroy, that was enough. One afternoon, Lily and I met for coffee. We talked about the future, about what we wanted to build, not out of spite, out of vision. She said something that stuck with me. We didn't just survive the fire. We learned how to build with what was left. I nodded because she was right. And the more I looked around at the life I'd rebuilt, the friends who'd become family, the laughter that didn't feel borrowed, the mornings that didn't start with dread, the more I realized that this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. As I stood at the window later that evening, watching the sky shift into that kind of soft orange that only happens right before sunset, I felt it in my chest. Not a pang, not regret, just gratitude for the storm, for the silence, for the chance to begin again. And I knew without doubt that this was what freedom looked like. Not revenge, not punishment, just peace. Earned, chosen, and finally, mine. Story 2. I never imagined being betrayed in this way by my own family. No matter what, I always think they would be fair and at least show me respect. However, I was mistaken. It's just incorrect. It all began when my parents made the decision to grow their company. They are the owners of a modest family business. They also discussed making it into something larger for as long as I can recall. I grew up hearing about their dreams from my sister, how we may eventually take control and increase its success. They offered me a job with the firm when I graduated. I didn't care if the position didn't pay well. I was thrilled to be able to help, to demonstrate my worth. A few years older than me, my sister had been employed there for a while. I could see that she was doing well too. She moved into an upscale apartment, owned a great automobile, and never appeared to have financial difficulties. I never considered asking, but I figured she was getting paid well. Would I? After all, I was committed to putting in a lot of effort and securing my position inside the organization. I made that error, assuming that everyone was receiving equitable treatment. I committed myself to the business for months. Late at night, early in the morning. Weekends spent managing additional responsibilities. I believed I was creating something that would someday belong to me, so I went above and above. However, I heard something one day that made my stomach turn. On the phone, my sister was laughing and raving about a sizable payout she had recently gotten. I can still recall the precise phrases. Yes, it was recently sent over by Mom and Dad. Crazy, huh? I froze so much for having trouble at work. Money. What kind of payment? At first, I dismissed it, supposing it was a bonus or something. However, I wasn't comfortable with the manner she stated it. I made the decision to question my parents about it later that evening. I did not anticipate a conflict. At that point, I wasn't even angry. All I wanted to do was figure it out. However, my mother sneered and shook her head as if I had said something absurd when I questioned them. Your household? As though that clarified everything she said. Family is not a business. We all support one another. That's the way things are. I was utterly stunned as I looked at her. How come my sister was getting paid if working for nothing was the norm? At that moment, I heard a notification ding out. My sister looked at her phone and grinned. As she turned the screen to face me, my heart raced. Just enough to show the message to me. Her account had just received a sizable payment. I took a deep breath. Perhaps you simply aren't worth the money. Her smirk grew as she said that in a mocking manner. Something broke inside of me. I refrained from arguing. I didn't shout. I didn't ask for a reason. I simply shut down my phone, turned around, and left. However, what followed? That's where the intriguing part begins. I went directly to my room, my thoughts racing. How could they do this to me? After everything I had done for the firm, late nights, early mornings, additional hours, I was nothing more than free labor to them. And my sister, she knew about it. She enjoyed it. That sneer on her face wasn't simply arrogance, it was satisfaction. I sat on my bed gazing at my phone. I felt like screaming, to go up against them, to insist on answers. However, what was the purpose? Their decisions had already been made. I was in a daze for the next several days, My heart wasn't in it, but I still went to work. My mother's contemptuous chuckle was all I could hear whenever I saw my parents. That payment message flashed on my sister's smartphone every time I saw her. Then one evening I decided I was done. I refused to waste any more time working for unappreciative individuals. I was worthless if I wasn't worth the money. I went directly to my dad's desk when I arrived at the workplace the following morning and gave him my resignation. He hardly raised his eyes from his screen. "Stop being dramatic," he whispered. I refused to back down. "I'm not. I'm going." With a sigh, he turned to look at me. "Even so, where will you go?" "There isn't another employment planned for you. You have no strategy." I didn't, and he was correct. However, I would. I looked at them one more time before leaving. Not even my personal belongings were taken. I simply walked out, and I felt free for the first time in a long time. However, I was unaware that leaving would start a series of events that none of us anticipated. I was lost for the first several days. I had no actual plan, no employment, and no money. Oddly enough, though, I didn't regret going. If anything, I was happy that I was no longer a piece in someone else's game and could finally take charge of my own life. Over the course of the next week, I updated my resume, applied for employment, and considered my options. I didn't even speak to my relatives. Not a single phone call, not even a text. They also didn't make contact. That ached at first. However, I later came to the realization that I shouldn't care for them if they weren't concerned enough to check on me. Then an unforeseen event occurred. Late one evening, I received a message from a former coworker who had worked for my parents' business for a short time before leaving in anger. "I heard that you went. Well done. You might want to look into the company's financial situation, by the way. There's something strange happening." I scowled. Strange how simply investigate it. Believe me, my interest overcame the fact that I had no understanding what they were discussing. Some of the company's financial documents were still available to me. My login has never been revoked by my parents. I thus made the decision to have a look out of pure curiosity. My blood ran cold when I discovered what I did. Large sums of money were being dispersed, far more than my sister should have received. Bonus after bonus in addition to her pay, all included under ambiguous headings such as special allowances and consultation costs. It wasn't even the worst part, though. I was the name on a few of the transactions. Money that never reached me. I should have got the money, but it was obviously going somewhere else. And my folks weren't simply being unjust if I was correct about where it was headed. I was being stolen from. My heart was racing as I sat there, looking at the television. Favoritism wasn't all that this was. My parents weren't the only ones who refused to pay me. This was outright deception. They had been transferring funds under my name. Funds that never found their way into my account. And based on the dates, it appeared that this had been going on for months or possibly years. I inhaled deeply before continuing to peruse. All of the transactions pointed to a single account, which was predictably my sister's. She owned a vehicle, an apartment, and costly holidays among other luxuries. They came from more than just her pay. Money that should have been mine was used to pay for them in part. I was ill. I wanted to barge into their office and face them head on. I wanted to yell and demand clarification. However, I was aware, if they were prepared to rob me, how far they would go to hide it was impossible to predict. I decided to take screenshots instead. Each and every illicit payment and transaction. In case my data were lost, I emailed copies to a reliable buddy and backed everything up onto a private drive. After that, I sat back and considered my choices. First point, they would just reject it, fabricate a tale, and act as though I was exaggerating if I confronted them directly. Daughter as well. I could strike them where their money business and reputation would be most harmed. And the more I considered it, the more I understood that this was about more than simply reclaiming what was rightfully mine. Making them pay was the goal. I thus devised a strategy, and they didn't anticipate it when the time arrived. I meticulously prepared throughout the course of the following several days. I started by getting in touch with a familiar accountant who had left my parents' business on poor terms. I showed them all that I had discovered. How did they respond? Shock. This is a severe matter. They stated that it is fraud if they are transferring funds in your name without your permission. Additionally, it can constitute embezzlement if they are utilizing business cash for personal expenditures. I needed to hear that so much. I then contacted a lawyer. I gave them all the details, showed them the documents, and inquired about my alternatives. They had an even better answer. You have a strong argument. You might be able to get the money back and potentially even shut down the business if you file a lawsuit. I realized then that I wasn't only going to reveal them. I intended to ruin them. But I wanted to do one last thing before I moved. I hoped they would acknowledge it. So I set up a friendly visit to your house. It was the first time I had seen them since quitting. My mother hardly raised her head from her phone as I entered the room. My father only gave a nod. What about my sister? She was wearing the same arrogant look that she normally wore. I cleared my throat, sat down at the dining table, and spoke as nonchalantly as possible. I have been reviewing my financial situation. Discovered anything intriguing? My mother arched an eyebrow. Yes, exactly. Leaning forward, I said, it looks like I've been paid the entire time. However, I never noticed any indication of it. Strange, isn't it? Quiet, foolish. Why I noticed Dad's jaw tighten but his face remained the same. My mother moved a little in her seat. What about my sister? Her phone instantly piqued her curiosity. I only needed that assurance. I waited for a long moment before getting to my feet. Anyway, I just wanted to bring it up. I have no doubt that the authorities will find it as fascinating as I did. My mother's head jerked upward. What? I grinned. Oh, I forgot to mention that I had conversations with an accountant and a lawyer. Let's just say that things are about to get rather interesting. I turned and left after that. And that's when everything really began to go wrong. I left that residence without turning around. However, I was aware that I had just started an uncontrollable fire. That night was the first indication of fear. My phone kept buzzing. Calls from my sister, my father, and my mother. I didn't respond to any of them. Then the texts arrived. We must discuss, Mom. Avoid making any foolish decisions. Let's keep this realistic, Dad. This isn't how family matters should be handled, sister. You're exaggerating. It's not really important, not a huge concern. I had been the victim of their theft, transferring my money into my sister's account while using me as free labor. They wanted to use the family card now that I was defending myself. That's too late. I had another meeting with my lawyer the next morning. I formally sued my parents' business for financial mismanagement and fraud. My attorney reassured me that they wouldn't just have to reimburse me based on the proof I had. They could run into major legal issues. It wasn't only me who had problems with them either. I began contacting former workers who had quit the firm due to unethical behavior. Finding others who had been overworked, underpaid, or even conned by my parents didn't take long. News began to circulate. A week later, an anonymous whistleblower caused the actual explosion. I promise it's not me. Disclosed the financial records I had discovered. Somehow the material ended up on a website run by a company watchdog. My parents' business was suddenly the subject of public inquiry. Customers began to leave. Investors began to retreat. My parents had spent years cultivating that reputation. Overnight, it was falling apart. My sister's valuable bank account too, the one with the money that was taken from me. It was frozen. Then just when I thought their situation couldn't get much worse, the police intervened. The investor made quick moves. It's too quick for my folks to hide. I woke up to the news one morning. Officially, my parents' business was being investigated for financial wrongdoing. And for them, it grew worse. It turns out that they have done other unethical things besides funneling money via my identity. More skeletons emerged from their closet as detectives continued their investigation. Unreported evasion of income taxes. Misuse of business cash. It was a complete disaster. Then for the first time in weeks, my sister called me one morning. In fact, I picked up. Are you content now? She lost her temper. Everything was damaged by you. It nearly made me chuckle. Everything was damaged by me. I was stolen from by you, Mom and Dad. Tell me a lie. You believe I'm the issue because I used me. It wasn't theft. She fired back. Her voice broke. It was only a reallocation. You will ultimately get it back, they claimed. I gave a headshake. Whoa, you really think that quiet? After letting it linger for a second, I spoke calmly again. Despite having every chance to outperform them, you decided to be just like them. And now you have to deal with the fallout. She hung up without saying another thing. That was our final conversation. However, it didn't stop there. My lawyer gave me an update over the phone a few weeks later. Due to litigation penalties and lost business, your parents' business is failing. It won't be around for long. What about my money? I inquired. They will be required to repay every last dime. I took a deep breath and sat back in my chair. I was victorious. They had been treating me as like I was unworthy of compensation for years, as if I were free labor. They had lost everything and now it was their turn. I ought to have felt content, even victorious. However, I only felt liberated. Free at last. When my parents understood there was no way out, the true mayhem started. Point one night. My mother gave me a call. I nearly disregarded it. Nevertheless, I felt compelled to listen to her. I heard just weeping as soon as I responded. "How could you harm us like this?" She let out a cry. "Your family is us. We're being ruined by you." I let her cry and said nothing. Between breaths, she broke off her voice. My father then picked up the phone. Not like my mom. He wasn't in tears. He was enraged. "What a sour brat you are." He spit. "Following everything that we have done for you. This is how you stab us in the back." I sneered. "We nourished you after all you did to me. You are repaying us by destroying our business even though we provided you a house." I laughed bitterly at that. "Oh, so you did the bare minimum as parents and now I owe you my entire life." My dad was furious. "Are you even aware of your actions? We might fail. We could lose our home. Stress is killing your mom." She had been in tears for days. Before robbing me, she ought to have considered it. I fired back. "You are to blame for this." My dad let out a shout. "For a small amount of money, you ruined your own family." That was it. I broke a small sum of money. "You embezzled my salary for years. You covered your tracks by using me. You treat me like a servant and let my sister live like a queen. You want pity now?" I continued, even though my voice was trembling with anger. "This is what you selected. You believed that you would always get away with it, and now that the repercussions are finally upon you, you hold me responsible." The line died. I suppose the truth was too much for him. It wasn't over, though. My sister texted me a few days later. "Sister, I hope all is well with you. Mom lost it. She has trouble eating. The business is failing. We're losing everything." I shook my head and gazed at the message, but I suppose that didn't matter to you. They were still unable to grasp it. They believed that I was to blame. I texted back that I was the bad guy. "You had an option. I could have been treated like family by you. You treated me like trash instead. Savor the results." I then clicked send. A week later, the ultimate blow was delivered. I got a call from my lawyer. "It's official. The business has gone bankrupt. Your parents' assets are being forced to be sold. Additionally, you will receive your money back." I gave a nod. I had one taking it all in. I drove by my parents' office a few days later. The building was deserted. "Are you up for sale?" The sign is buried beneath the ground. The house I grew up in. On the market as well. The empire they had ruled and everything they had constructed were gone. Without much delay, the rumors began to circulate. Their formerly respectable business was now a warning about dishonesty, greed, and broken family ties. Complaints were coming in from customers who had trusted them for years. The news reported on payments for workers who had worked for the firm for decades. They were all over it. The controversy garnered media attention. However, it wasn't simply the business that had collapsed. The family was falling apart. I still couldn't bring myself to contact them after 2 weeks. I was aware that it was over. What had been damaged could not be repaired. Then my phone buzzed once more one day. My mom was the one. I responded this time. "You know we've lost everything." Her voice was emotionless as she said, "The home has vanished. The business has vanished. Your dad? He is consuming more alcohol than before. I'm at a loss on what to do." I didn't know how to react. Good was what I wanted to say. But there was a strange tinge of shame in another part of me. "What should I say in your opinion?" At last I asked in a flat voice. "All we need is for you to return. Assist us in fixing this. Please, we are related." Her voice broke. I stopped. Despite the desperate tone of the remarks, all I could think about was what I had lost. The entire year of unpaid labor. The unfulfilled pledges. How they had acted as though I didn't exist. "Throw away. You had an opportunity to treat me like a family member. However, you decided not to," I said icily. "You put money before me, and now you want my assistance." The other end remained silent for a long time. She was sniffling, attempting to contain herself, and I could hear it. "Please, we apologize. Your dad is deteriorating. This is too much for him." I stared at the floor while biting my lip. "Perhaps you ought to have considered that before this whole thing began. You believed I had no value. You know better now, though. Her answer was little more than a whisper. You never had no value? You are my kid. However, we were mistaken. Please, please, please. Hearing her in this state was difficult. Pleading, broken. I was on the verge of reaching out. However, there was another aspect of myself that had been wounded, deceived, and disregarded. Too furious to pardon, I am unable to assist you. Finally, I said, no more. I hung up after saying that. Days went by and my family's commotion gradually subsided. The phone calls ceased. The texts ceased. There was nothing left for my parents to take from me. They had officially reached their lowest point. I concentrated on starting again in my own life. Knowing that I was in charge gave me serenity. I knew I couldn't turn back even if it was painful to see them fall apart. In actuality, what had been damaged could not be repaired. The harm they had inflicted was too profound and deeply embedded. Even if it meant leaving them behind, I had to keep going. That's the conclusion of my narrative. I'm intrigued now. If you had been me, how would you have responded? Do you think you would have given them another chance? Or like me, would you have turned away? Please share your opinions in the comments section below. Story 3. Last spring, my brother Callum received a promotion. A large one. Announcement for the entire company. Something like champagne in the office. Upper management. The corner office. The process. My folks were overjoyed. They took him on a week-long luxury Mediterranean vacation with his girlfriend. 5 stars, whole product, everything. Every day they uploaded pictures. On the balcony for dinner. Matching robes and captioned sunset toasts. I'm really happy for our boy. I like the pictures. Sent a message of congratulations. Before they departed, they even gave Callum a call to say, well-deserved, man. After that, I returned to my job. I received a promotion 3 months later. It's huge, but not nearly as showy as Callum's. I was promoted to a lead position in the analytics division of my company. Managing people was something I had never done before. My name appeared in the internal newsletter for the first time. At supper, I told my folks. They grinned. That's fantastic, said. My father gave a nod. Adidas, excellent work. My mother inquired about the new role's dress code. The topic of conversation then turned back to Callum. A store was recently created by his girlfriend. They had taken in a dog. I assumed perhaps there might be a corresponding vacation, but I didn't expect one. A card toast, emotion. That weekend instead, they headed to the lake home. Only the two of them. No communication, no invitation, just another caption for a selfie taken from the dock. Some silence at last. I persuaded myself it didn't matter at first. It was not necessary to celebrate anything. Fanfare wasn't necessary for anything. However, my aunt informed me 2 weeks later that they had volunteered to cover the cost of Callum's wedding venue. They had not yet been engaged. My mother dismissed it when I questioned her about it. When the moment comes, we just want to make sure they're ready. As if they were setting up for the future. They believed they were unworthy or unnecessary. I considered going up to them, but I didn't want to come out as envious, petty, or like I was keeping score. So I put it out of my mind till my birthday. On a Tuesday, it touched down. I didn't anticipate anything significant. A cake or dinner, perhaps? However, my dad informed me that they were leaving town for a little vacation when I called to see if they were available. I inquired about the same cruise line that Callum and I had used. He said that because we were repeat clients, they provided us a discount. I remained silent. He laughed, breaking the stillness. Next time we'll take you. But we were both aware that there would never be another chance. Not for me. I ate takeaway by myself in my flat that evening while looking over their brand new trip pictures. On one, Callum had made a comment. Does it look familiar? Plenty of likes. Nobody brought me up. Nobody ever did. And that's when something changed inside of me. Not angry, not just yet, but into consciousness. This has nothing to do with travel. It has to do with position, about their perception of me. As the one who didn't need anything, not as the second son. He wouldn't fight back so they could ignore him. Since I never caused a commotion, they believed they knew who I was. However, that was going to change. We enjoyed a supper as a family 2 weeks following their second cruise. It was just a Sunday cookout at my parents' house. There was nothing official about it. We have done it 100 times. There were Callum and his girlfriend. So were our cousin Sam, 2 aunts and uncles. I nearly skipped it. I wanted to see if they would say anything, though. It's the holiday. Even a small amount of appreciation and apologies was included in the pictures that were shared during my birthday. A toast late, anything. Rather, my mom gave me a half hug and my dad nodded. No. Cheers to your birthday. No. How is the new position going? No. Come on over and let's catch up. Once more, Callum was the night's main issue. He was invited to speak at a regional leadership conference by his firm. As he explained the invitation, the guest list, and the keynote program, my parents grinned. Everyone gave a clap. He was asked if he felt anxious. He was born for this, according to his girlfriend. I sipped my beer and observed. My promotion went unquestioned. Not once. I assisted in carrying drinks from the kitchen when the food was served. Nobody took attention. I picked up a plate and refilled glasses. Someone fell, unnoticeable. My mother once asked me if I could snap a group photo. I centered them, held up the phone, and saw it. An image of everyone's glowing arms encircling one another. Callum in the middle. And I, out of the frame, literally. I wasn't asked to be in the picture. Pretending to check a message, I returned the phone and went inside, but I didn't immediately come out. I listened while standing in the hallway, barely visible. They were discussing plans for Christmas. Callum was planning a trip overseas with his girlfriend. They're present to themselves. According to my mother, my father volunteered to help pay for the flights, not to be overlooked. Nobody questioned if I would be present. Nobody inquired about my activities. I felt as though I was a visitor in my childhood home, helpful when required, the remainder of the time invisible. At that point, I made the decision to stop arguing about the past. I was going to start reacting differently, but I wasn't going to question why I was treated like a supporting player in my own family. As a result, I didn't send any gifts for Christmas. I failed to appear. I didn't send a message to clarify. I let the quiet do the talking. 3 days later, my mom phoned. You were missed. I informed her that work was keeping me busy. There was something you could have said. I gave it some thought, I said. But then I recalled that on my birthday you went on a cruise without saying anything. After a moment of silence, she said almost defensively, "It wasn't intended to do you harm. We didn't anticipate your level of concern." I felt that statement sink into my chest. It was sincere, not because it was nasty. I educated them not to care, so they assumed I wouldn't. Soon after, gently and without anger, I hung up. The next family function was just finished. I said no. Claimed to have plans. The next one. And I didn't answer. And gradually there were fewer invitations. They continued posting group photographs, tagging each other in stories about aspiring young professionals and seeing Callum once a week. Me, I turned into a ghost in my own family, and I gave up attempting to hand it for the first time. I ceased gauging my accomplishments by who observed them. When you eventually quit waiting for approval from those who have made it obvious they are not interested in you, a subtle change occurs. I concentrated on my task. I'm not burying my sentiments in my work. Really concentrated, I mean. I took risks, began leading a team that quadrupled in size in less than a year, and began presenting ideas further up the chain. I eventually transitioned into a position where I was in charge of 3 departments. Not simply figures, plans, and guidance. Newsletters for the sector began to feature my name. On a panel, I spoke. I had junior employees as mentors. I no longer sought approbation. I was hitting it while pursuing what I felt I was capable of. I purchased an apartment in a city I adored that year instead of a huge property. Clean, bright, and close to a park with a balcony that received the ideal amount of late afternoon sunlight. I invited my neighbors, coworkers, and other university buddies to a housewarming celebration that I organized. The list did not include my parents. Neither was Callum. I no longer wanted to perform for them, but not because I wanted to harm them. I didn't want to see them contrast my creation with anything Callum had previously shared. I didn't want their endorsement to be like a stamp on my already obtained passport. Then an unforeseen event occurred. My parents' longtime buddy, someone who had met me a few times as a child but whom I hardly knew, sent me a LinkedIn message, brief, courteous. "Have you heard about your recent triumph? Well done. Your folks must be overjoyed." No, they weren't delighted. And as I glanced at it, I felt my chest tighten. They had remained silent. Regarding the new employment, they had not inquired. When my name appeared in a compilation of professional profiles, I never received a call. The condo was never brought up. Not a single remark beneath the picture of me standing on the new balcony, glass in hand, Smiling my first one in 6 months. They were aware. They did, of course. We had enough things in common. Individuals conversed. Friends and family sent comments on the post. I received an SMS from my cousin saying she had showed her mother. They were aware, yet they remained silent. Callum's engagement followed. It was an announcement of complete production. Champagne a drone, a sponsored hashtag, and pictures taken in a flower field. The proposal's video. The caption? Yes, she replied. Without the individuals who always had faith in me, I couldn't have succeeded. My mother made the first remark. You have our utmost admiration, dear. You've created a stunning creation. I shut off the app because I was finally beginning to understand the difference between being ignored and being free, not because I was upset. I sent no present. Did you not enjoy the post? When my dad texted me a week later to let me know that the engagement party was approaching and they thought I would be attending, I didn't reply. I just said, I won't be going. No cause. Don't apologize. And there was no follow-up this time. They had become aware of the distance. I sensed it in the slight changes. The occasional text and check. When my mother left voicemails, there were a few pauses in her voice. However, they had not linked it to any of their actions. Because it's impossible for those who don't see you in the first place to comprehend why you vanish. I wasn't leaving out of animosity either. I left because I had finally come to the conclusion that you don't owe intimacy to those who only refer to you as family when it suits you. Since your seat has always been borrowed rather than constructed, you are unaware of your presence at the table. Applause wasn't what I was after. No more. However, after the nomination was made, there was still a flicker in me, that old instinct. When you finally burst through the roof, you want someone to notice. You would never touch, they claimed. I had silently admired the industry group for years until they sent me the email. Alexander Reed is the nominee. Analytics, Technology, and Leadership. After reading that again, I just sat there without smiling or pumping my fist, because I experienced for the first time what it was like to be liked by people who didn't have to like me, but did. A toast was thrown by my coworkers. They used streamers to adorn the workplace kitchen. A cake bearing my name was cooked by someone. Speeches were given. Laughter. A handwritten note was even sent by my former manager. You didn't take any quick routes. Everything was earned. You, everyone. I just uploaded one picture. Just a plaque on the nomination list with my name etched on it. No caption. The comments came flooding in. Professors, old acquaintances, coworkers, and some extended family members I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Similar to the post. My folks, nothing. Not even an SMS message. I initially believed that they might not have noticed it, but then my cousin Layla sent me a note. I noticed your name on the list of nominees. Told your mother she was unaware. She did. She simply remained silent, or chose not to, or didn't believe it was important enough to answer the phone. The award presentation took place a week later. A black tie. Large venue official pictures. I didn't have to win, but I didn't. It was sufficient to be nominated. Along with the fact that everyone in the room stood as my name was called out. Who was it that saw me? Every single one of me. Then I saw it when I arrived home. A remark on one of Callum's recent entries. One more announcement about a career. One more accomplishment. And my mother's remark underneath it. Never before have we been so proud. The moment. I didn't weep 2 hours after my name was called out on stage. I refrained from screaming. I simply sat there and realized something I had not wanted to acknowledge. Despite anything. It has nothing to do with my lack of success. It had nothing to do with my lack of flamboyance. It has to do with roles. I wasn't the golden child in their eyes. Things was always me who could make things work. The person who didn't require assistance. Thus, they did not provide it. I composed a letter and opened a document on my laptop that evening. Not to them. To me. To the me who still desired for them to see it. They continued to wait for the unanswerable call. You've finished waiting. I composed. You have finished proving. They noticed you. They just refused to acknowledge it. You no longer require them to. I never forwarded the letter to them. The nomination was never mentioned. Weeks later, they finally contacted to ask whether I would be attending Callum's wedding, and I declined. My mother paused. He truly wants you to be present. He didn't inquire. He thought you would arrive. I stated that was the issue. She didn't say anything. Conversely, defensively, this doesn't need to be that dramatic, I'm not. I said, I'm simply being truthful. She didn't dispute, didn't offer an apology, used a flat to stop the call. Okay, be careful. And that was all. No follow-up. No justification. This time it was just the place I'd learned to live in. On my terms at last. The wedding was not attended by me. Didn't send a present, didn't apologize. When someone uploaded a picture of Callum and his bride coming down the aisle beneath a canopy of sparklers, they failed to reply to the family group chat. The thread was muted by me. They didn't inquire about my location. Not directly, but my cousin Sam sent me a note 2 days later. It'd been more than a year since we last spoke. Don't fall out. Only distance. The sort that occurs when you have lived different lives for a sufficient amount of time. I don't mean to seem strange, but are you okay? I answered. Yes. Why, everyone just saw that you weren't there at the wedding. Your mother seemed a little strange about it. I figured you could have had a motive. After pondering that for a minute, I responded in writing. She knew I wouldn't be arriving. Yes, he answered, but I doubt she believed you would follow through. I remembered that statement because it was accurate. They were accustomed to my bending showing up and filling the void by remaining mute when no one else was holding the peace. However, I felt nothing this time, and the lack of sensation left a form that was impossible to erase. A day later, Sam sent another note. I spoke with Aunt Jill. She made a somewhat odd statement. Proceed. Although he didn't specify what it was, your dad informed some folks that you've been doing your own thing for some time. They don't even tell people what I do, so I just gazed at the message. I suppose not. She said that he quickly shifted the topic. Their lack of pride in me wasn't the only thing. What they were unable to manage made them feel ashamed. Their definition of family success didn't apply to me. I didn't seek assistance. I didn't depend on them, and I didn't play the part they had written for me. They therefore acted as though my root didn't exist, rather than acknowledging it. In this manner, they would never have to explain why they had given one son money trips and praise, while leaving the other to start from nothing and create his future. Sam and I went out for coffee later that week. He inquired more about my life, career, and relocation, that he regretted not staying in contact. You may have seemed too busy to me. Oh, he said. Yes, I was. Not for this, though, I told him. For a while, we sat in silence. Then he said something that struck me more forcefully than I anticipated. They always seem to treat you differently, in my opinion. Simply said I had no idea how much you were carrying. The problem was that, until you ultimately let go of the weight, no one can see it. He asked me, do you think you'll ever go back to the family before we left? He nodded when I stated that. I'm not sure, I said. Perhaps, but not as a person awaiting admission. Only if I have the freedom to choose my position. On my way to bed that evening, I passed the letter of nomination for the frame. In order to view it before heading out to work, I used to keep it by the door. Evidence that I now mattered. It simply resided there. There is silence. Similar to me. I didn't move it, but I also didn't need it to remember me anymore. Because getting noticed isn't always the goal. Whether you receive applause, they are about staying true to who you are. 6 months after the wedding, the note arrived. Easy, unexpected. Hey, feel free to speak at any moment. I should have stopped staring at it sooner. Callum wasn't one for ambiguous communications. He never minced words. A planner at all times. With a calendar packed with team meetings and dinner appointments, the sun is always shining. He wasn't usually like this. 2 hours later, I responded. Yes, what is going on? Would it be possible for us to have coffee together? Okay, I said. We chose a spot that was midway between us. There are too many unoccupied seats in this peaceful cafe with large windows for a Tuesday afternoon. He seemed worn out, still shiny. My jacket, which probably cost more than my first month's rent, is still on. However, something seemed ragged around the edges. Additionally, he didn't start the conversation with small chat and he ran his hand through his hair. You didn't attend the wedding? He remarked. I gave a nod. No, I didn't. He returned the nod. No charges. Acceptance only. After a while, he remarked, I wasn't surprised. However, I suppose I thought you would. I understand, I said, but you never invited me. Not right away. Did I have to? That's the main idea. His gaze lowered to his coffee. I believe I knew the answer, so I didn't ask. Why, in your opinion, was the response negative? I inquired. He let out a breath. Because we abandoned you and pretended that you were the one who had left. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real that stopped me. In addition, it was the first time a member of my family had spoken it aloud. What hurt the most, I said. It had nothing to do with the cruises, the money, or even being disregarded. Then what? It was the quiet. I sat on the outside like everything was usual, watching you all repeatedly congratulate each other, as if I were the silent one. In reality, though, I simply became weary of attempting to make an impression in a place that didn't have a chair for me. He didn't defend or argue. Our parents only listened. That is not how they intended it to be. At last he said, I know, I said, but they did. For more than an hour, we discussed the disparities from our early years, the small ways they gave him preference, and their presumptions that I would be well on my own. He continued by saying, I think I like being the favorite because I didn't know what being forgotten was doing to me, and I didn't know what it was costing you. Until I stop acting like it didn't hurt, I said. He asked me whether I would ever think about returning before we left, not for them to just appear and be seen. It would have to be different, I responded, but maybe I want it to be. Since he wasn't providing a way to return to the previous setup, it was more important than he realized. He had a door open. There was no need for me to crawl through. He sent me a message that evening. I appreciate today. I'm hoping this isn't my final response. It is up to us all. And I think we might try for once. We were speaking the truth for the first time, not because we had to make all the corrections. Silently, spring arrived. Not a word. No official invites. Callum just sent out a group message. We're considering having a laid-back dinner at our house the following weekend. Anyone who wishes to attend is welcome. There is no pressure. I nearly disregarded it. I wasn't sure what showing up would mean anymore, not because I was resentful. Is it going to be awkward? Is it performative? Would it be like returning to a home that had forgotten I was there? However, the message was distinct in some way. Don't make any assumptions. No timetable. No guilt in passivity. Only a gap. So I went. It was not what I had anticipated at Callum's apartment, nor gaudy, nor ostentatious. There was only a long dining table that appeared to have witnessed a few genuine talks, a cozy living room, and soothing music. For the first time in years, nobody made a big deal out of my arrival as I stepped in. No. Dramatic. Take a look at this person. No astonished astonishment. Callum just said, hey, I'm glad you made it. And another person. Layla, my cousin, smiling and bringing out a chair. It's for you. It was not a throne. There was no gold carving on it. The chair was just a wooden one. But no one in that room could have predicted how important it was that it was there on purpose. We had a quick conversation about employment. I brought up a recent hiring, a change in the person in charge, Callum's perceptive inquiries. No sarcastic remarks or pretended astonishment at my responses. After seeing the community panel online, my Aunt Jo gave me praise for how I handled it. The wedding was mentioned, but not as a weapon, only a time marker. And since people were beginning to realize that absence isn't necessarily a sign of rejection, nobody made an effort to make me feel guilty for missing it. When someone has been talked over for too long, it might occasionally be their sole remaining language. Callum drew me away as the evening wore on and everyone cleaned up. He said, I didn't tell Mom you were coming. I arched an eyebrow. She wouldn't want to know, I thought. Didn't believe it was her concern. She will learn and develop sentiments. He continued. However, you know nothing about her. I gave a nod. Are you certain she won't be upset with you for inviting me? She does it already. He grinned. Why not make it worthwhile? I laughed about it all for the first time then. Sincerely. It's not irony, not resentment, only relief. Because we weren't acting for the first time. That evening, Callum escorted me out. No pretentious speech or ostentatious handshakes. Just be sure to bring dessert the next time. Only if I get to choose the playlist, I said, making the drive home. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had prevailed in an unseen conflict. I simply felt rooted, as if I had at last gotten out of a familial structure that never made room for me. Rather, I saw it tilt slowly to meet me halfway. I quit performing for it not because I asked for it. Not everything had changed. My parents hadn't called yet. I'm still posting about Callum. continuing to act as though the gap was a coincidence. However, I no longer need their acknowledgement. I had created something outside of their sphere of influence and allowed it to flourish long enough to not be diminished by their shadow. Since I didn't show there to change history, the chair at Callum's table didn't have to erase what had already transpired. I didn't apologize when I came up to live. The apology isn't always given to you. The acclaim doesn't always come your way. Sometimes you just hear your name called out, as someone worth pulling out a chair for, not as an afterthought. And that's more than sufficient at times. Story 4. I made sure my sister lost custody when she said I posed a threat to my own children. I have 2 wonderful children and am a 34-year-old single parent. My daughter is 5 years old and my son is 8 years old. Although things haven't always been easy, I've put a lot of effort into creating a secure and contented home for us. Gabriella. My 37-year-old sister is married to Rodrigo and has 2 children, a girl of 7 years old and a boy of 10. Gabriella's life appears to be ideal on paper. An enormous suburban home, a 6-figure corporate career, and a seemingly well-organized spouse. But believe me, it's not as flawless as it looks. I never got along with Gabriella. She was the ideal child growing up, obeying all the rules, earning flawless grades, and making our parents pleased. I, on the other hand, was the rebellious child who questioned authority and made errors. Additionally, our parents claimed that it gave them gray hairs. Gabriella enjoyed showing me how successful she was. She was the type of sister who, even in those days, would ace an exam and let me see it, to remind me how effortless her perfection was. As adults, our relationship didn't get any better. This superiority complex has always been a part of Gabriella. She loves to seem as though she is giving me advice that will benefit me, but it is usually a thinly veiled critique of my decisions. When my son chose dance over soccer, Gabriella responded as though I had sentenced him to a life of bullying. She termed my decision to become a freelance graphic designer a hobby job and questioned whether I had considered the sort of example I was providing for my children. And let's not even talk about the time. Since my daughter preferred the color black over pink, she inquired as to if I was putting money aside for treatment. It is only Gabriella. Everything began to go wrong at the most recent family get-together. At our parents' place, it was a rare occurrence when everyone turned out for a backyard BBQ. My children were giggling and having a blast as they ran about with their cousins. Naturally, though, Gabriella had to say something loud so that everyone could hear it. She mentioned that I let my children run amok and that it's no wonder they don't listen to anyone. I've learned to ignore her, so I laughed it off for the time being, but I could sense Rodrigo's critical side. I think I'm subconsciously comparing my parenting to their rigorous screen time regimens and color-coded chore sheets. They are the epitome of helicopter parents, Rodrigo and Gabriella. Their children are not permitted to consume sweets or remain up beyond 7:30 p.m. or see any non-educational content. Rodrigo consistently shares photographs of their kids' handmade scientific projects or family game evenings that are fit on Pinterest, but their children always appear worn out. They seem to be growing up in a pressure cooker. Gabriella, however, views being a mother as a side career. She works long hours and mostly uses her phone to browse during family gatherings, only interrupting to provide directions or scold others. A week or so following the cookout, uncomfortably, my mother phoned me. She informed me that Gabriella had been making disparaging remarks about me, according to several members of her extended family. She had apparently been telling others that I was too lenient to be a father and that my erratic lifestyle would damage my children. She also implied that before it was too late, someone needed to contact Child Protective Services (CPS). I was taken aback. Criticizing me in public is one thing, but saying things like that behind my back and involving CPS is quite another. That's treachery on a whole other level. My biggest dread materialized a few days later. A knock on the door was followed by standing. 2 CPS employees were present. They claimed to have received an anonymous allegation regarding neglect and dangerous living circumstances. Even though my heart was pounding, I allowed them in. They inquired about my children's diet and sleeping habits, and they were courteous but inquisitive. My son and daughter, bless them, were cooperative despite being perplexed when they spoke to them. An hour or so later, the staff informed me that everything appeared to be in order and that the case would be closed. Nevertheless, I was shocked by the encounter. During the upcoming family gathering, I made the decision to speak with Gabriella. I asked her if she knew anything about the CPS report, but I didn't make any direct accusations. She grinned and remarked that sometimes it takes an outsider to see the wider picture because everyone only cares about what's best for the kids. It was everything I could do not to yell. When my parents learned, they were incensed, but they insisted on keeping Gabriella around because they wanted to maintain the family's unity. Naturally, Rodrigo supported his wife, saying that they only did it out of love because I was too self-centered to prioritize my children. I realized then that I couldn't rely on them. I began documenting everything, including every instance of passive aggression, every dubious aspect of their parenting that caught my attention. Their children seemed more withdrawn every time I saw them, so I paid more attention to them at family get-togethers. I had no idea where this was going, but I was certain that I would not allow Rodrigo and Gabriella to get away with it. Shortly after the CPS visit, things began to fall apart. I was going through my messages one evening when I received a notification from a person I hadn't spoken to in a long time. Before he married Gabriella, Rodrigo had been close to this old friend, but they had drifted apart. At that point, things started to line up in unexpected ways. At first, Rodrigo's unexpected contact with his old friend seemed innocuous, but after our conversation, I had the feeling that things might be different. He informed me that he knew some things that I would likely find intriguing before he wandered away from Rodrigo. He opened up to me without much prodding. Rodrigo had skeletons in his closet, apparently. Although it was brief, he had an affair with one of Gabriella's co-workers early in their marriage. It caused a quiet scandal within Rodrigo's social circle, which was likely the reason he cut ties with this friend. Gabriella knew about the affair but chose to sweep it under the rug to maintain the facade of a perfect couple. It seemed that Gabriella believed their professional success and impeccable social media presence were more important than addressing the real issues in their marriage. This information felt like a key to me. It wasn't just about the affair, but about how far they were willing to manipulate the narrative to appear perfect. I knew I couldn't just use this information directly, but it gave me a new perspective. I started observing Gabriella and Rodrigo more closely, the way Rodrigo interacted with other women. The smiles he offered to female workers at family functions, even the comments he made when he thought no one was listening. Slowly, the masks they wore began to fracture, at least in my eyes, and I was determined to utilize this. Meanwhile, I continued documenting everything. At family events, I sat with their children, attempting to comprehend what was going in their house. The youngsters appeared exhausted, suspicious. It didn't take long for the eldest boy to let slip. Dad constantly screams when I screw up, and Mom never has time to play with me. Those sentences were burned into my mind. I sensed something was wrong, but I wanted more. It was over a Christmas meal when things began to unravel for them. Gabriella, as usual, spent much of the occasion on her phone, ignoring her kids. Rodrigo was plainly annoyed, trying to manage the situation as the youngsters began crying for attention. I, on the other hand, kept calm, observing everything. Rodrigo became irate when the youngster spilled a glass of juice on the table. Everybody in the room halted when he yelled. The young child burst into tears at once, and Gabriella chose to ignore it, simply giving the scenario a disapproving glance as though it were a bother to her. For me, at the time, that was the tipping point. I remained silent, but it made me more determined. I was aware that CPS would have gotten involved once more if it had been my family. Why shouldn't they have the same opportunity? Using the information I had recorded and the discussions I had with their kids, I made the decision to take action. I called a buddy who is a lawyer. He gave me advice on what to do once I discussed the circumstances. I submitted a thorough report outlining the oppressive conditions in which those children were growing up. The choice wasn't simple. I had a sneaking suspicion that this would lead to a major family split. However, another part of me felt it was the correct thing to do, recalling the restless nights following my own CPS visit. The repercussions quickly began to become apparent. A few weeks later, my mother sent me a message when I was dropping my children off at school. The fact that agents were looking into Gabriella's house made her crazy. It seemed as though their universe was finally collapsing, whether it was due to poetic justice or irony. I had no idea how much the agents had discovered. It was not only the emotional strain that Rodrigo and Gabriella put on their children, but also the unusual circumstances in which they were raised. The youngsters admitted that they spent the most of their time in total quiet because they were afraid of upsetting their parents, even though the house looked immaculate for guests and pictures. The incessant shouting and rigid regulations were oppressive. For the first time, Gabriella had to deal with the fallout from her emotional neglect when Rodrigo was brought in for interrogation. Gabriella and Rodrigo's flawless image was destroyed when word got out among family members. Despite my mother's attempts at mediation, I was irreconcilable. Gabriella made an attempt to confront me, saying that I had destroyed her family. However, I didn't hold back this time. She had no right to criticize me as a parent when her own home was in disarray, but I told her all I believed. How she concealed her imperfections behind the facade of perfection, and most all, how I would never forgive her for using CPS against me without good cause. Rodrigo and Gabriella had a difficult few months. Although there was no physical abuse, the CPS investigation found that the children were in a damaging emotional environment. They were under social worker supervision and were to attend family therapy. Ironically, the children opened up more when they spent more time with our parents. I remained committed to providing my kids with the home they were due, but I also felt a sense of accomplishment that justice had been done this time, even if Gabriella was never able to restore the reputation she so highly prized. Her marriage to Rodrigo started to deteriorate, and she started criticizing him instead of me. For the first time in years, I felt as like I could finally breathe in peace as I watched a house of cards made of falsehoods fall apart. After that, Gabriella and Rodrigo found themselves in a steady but unavoidable downward spiral. They had to attend supervised treatment sessions as a result of the CPS investigation. But what ought to have been a chance for them to start again turned into the start of the end. Rodrigo couldn't bear losing control of the story they had fought so hard to uphold, and Gabriella found it difficult to be scrutinized. Contrary to what Gabriella might have thought, I was uninterested in their personal problems, even when their marriage began to permanently fall apart. Although the children were still under the custody of their parents, it didn't matter to me. I was aware that their living situation had altered. The conduct of Rodrigo and Gabriella was being closely watched, and social workers came by on a daily basis. The luxury of concealing the actual events was no longer available to them. My mother made an attempt to persuade me to make amends with Gabriella at a family get-together a few months later. "The family has to remain together," she said. Gabriella took advantage of the opportunity to try to change the story once more by making herself the focus of attention. "Perhaps you wouldn't have spent so much time if you had concentrated on bettering your own life rather than attempting to destroy mine," she replied with a sarcastic smirk. I didn't hold back. "Let your life be ruined, Gabriella. That's what you did. You made the decision to put your reputation ahead of your kids. You made the decision that looking flawless was more important than being a good mother, as well as failing to accept accountability for your errors. I was attacked by you. You didn't realize your house was built of glass when you flung stones at mine." For the first time, the people surrounding us didn't support her when she tried to argue. Normally quiet in such circumstances, Rodrigo was clearly uneasy. The reality could no longer be ignored, and everyone was aware of this. My mother, who had always been forgiving of her, cut Gabriella off before she could raise her voice any further. "You must cease attributing the results of your decisions to other people." That was a startling moment. At last, my mother, who had always made an effort to maintain harmony, admitted what everyone already knew. The only thing that had harmed Gabriella was her own behavior. The news started to circulate a few months later. During their divorce processes, Gabriella and Rodrigo's marriage was formally terminated. Information that had only been discussed in family hushes was revealed. While Gabriella did the same to Rodrigo, Rodrigo attempted to exploit Gabriella's shortcomings against her in order to obtain an advantage in the asset division. They were both prepared to play dirty. However, none of them had much left in the end. The children were sent to live with my parents, while their parents attempted to rebuild their lives after the house was sold to pay off debts. In contrast, I was in a better situation than before. My children flourished in a loving, free household. I had expanded my graphic design business and was at last in a financially and emotionally happy place. Although getting there hadn't been simple, each step served as a reminder that I had made the correct decision. Gabriella made many attempts to contact me. Ambiguous messages that are never really honest yet are typically passed off as apologies. I choose to disregard them. To his surprise, Rodrigo followed suit. Maybe Gabriella had never been as flawless as he thought, and he discovered this much too late. A few years later, my mother arranged a family reunion when I was reunited with Gabriella and Rodrigo's children. They appeared more content and at ease. They even timidly thanked me for all of my efforts. It dawned on me then that in spite of everything going on, what really mattered was that they were safe. I had somehow been able to keep both their children and my own safe. I felt at ease for the first time in years as I watched them play with my kids in the backyard. Although Rodrigo and Gabriela had damaged themselves, their decisions would not have a permanent effect. The kids were still in the running for something greater. It wasn't about retaliation in the end. It was not a hateful act. It was a battle for what was right and for the truth. In the process, I acquired something priceless, but I also lost a lot. The assurance that I took every precaution to keep people safe. And it was plenty for me. Story 5. Hello, this is Sarah. I'm going to read you Victoria's tale today, which is called This. My key didn't fit when I got home from a long day at work. We won't let you in unless you pay for our trip, my mom texted. Shivering from the cold, I slept in the vehicle. I packed my belongings in the morning, terminated the lease, and departed in the evening. Calls were ringing on my phone. All right, let's leave. In my parents' home, it was always Jessica, Jessica, and Jessica. To them, there was nothing wrong with my elder sister. When I was only there, for as long as I could remember, everything had been that way. Most people call me Victoria Tori, and at 27, I had finally adapted to being the Carter family's afterthought. I was doing rather well for myself, even if I was the disappointment to the family. As a corporate account manager at TechSpear Solutions, I had a terrific work and made a fair living. My parents never recognized it, though. For the past year, I've been renting a lovely small home in Meadowbrook, a peaceful neighborhood around 30 minutes from the city center. I even have an expanding savings account set up for a down payment on a home of my own. One day. 3 years ago, Jessica, 30, married Ryan, her college love. My parents lavished much too much money on their lavish wedding. Naturally, I was a bridesmaid, and I was dressed in a dreadful peach dress that Jessica had chosen especially for me since she knew I would look awful in it. Tonight is family supper. On a Tuesday morning, my mother texted me, "Avoid being late like you did the prior time." Gazing at my phone, I let out a sigh. I suffered family meals every month because of some misguided feeling of duty, but I just said, "I'll be there," and returned to getting ready for my morning meeting. Jessica's brand new SUV was already parked in my parents' driveway when I pulled in that evening. She had arrived early, of course, most likely to assist Mom in the kitchen and get extra points as the beloved kid. During dinner, my mother would ask Jessica about her work at the real estate agency. My father would nod enthusiastically at everything my sister said, and I would nibble at my food while occasionally using as little words as possible to respond directly to inquiries. Then Jessica gave a big clearing of her throat over dessert. "Ryan, Mom. Dad and I have some wonderful news." I was already picturing how much worse my life would get after Jessica gave birth to the first grandchild, so I prepared myself for a pregnancy announcement. "We've made the decision to launch our own company," Jessica said, holding Ryan's hand. My folks let out a shout. In fact, my mom gave a clap. Mom said, "Oh, honey, that's wonderful." "What sort of company?" "A boutique of luxury clothes," Jessica stated with a smile. Downtown, we discovered the ideal store location that drew my eye. I put a lot of effort into earning my degree in business management. Have you conducted a market research by attempting to maintain a neutral tone in contrast to Jessica, who barely passed her real estate license exam? Retail in the downtown area may be quite competitive. Jessica rolled her eyes. "Don't worry just yet. You don't have to think about everything all the time. I'm not thinking too much. These are fundamental business inquiries. Have you determined the initial expenses, anticipated income? Timeline for breaking even? You see, this is the reason no one enjoys speaking with you." Jessica lost her temper. "You have no knowledge of retail fashion. I'm passionate about this." Jessica straightened her posture. "There's actually one more item. To begin, we require some funding." There was silence in the room. I sensed that things was headed in a negative direction. "We hoped you could assist us," Jessica said, still glancing at our parents. "After the business takes off, you might want to get a mortgage on the property. We'll reimburse you plus interest. It's a given." My mouth fell open. It's been 30 years since they left that house. In a sense, it paid off. It is a really bad concept. Before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "You can't rest your house on a business that hasn't even begun yet, Mom and Dad. Not a retail company with such a high failure rate in particular." Jessica's voice rose as she emphasized that the firm would not fail. "God, Tori, you're just envious because you're wasting your life in that corporate drone job while Ryan and I are taking a risk on something we believe in." Feeling envious, I said it again incredulously. "My goal is to prevent my parents from becoming homeless." "No, you're attempting to prevent my success." Jessica got to her feet and yelled, "You have always been envious of me now. The idea that I could succeed and earn more money than you with your fancy business degree is too much for you to handle. The artificial tears that Jessica had mastered to gain what she wanted were now in her eyes. I got up and left the table. This is absurd. I refuse to sit here and be held accountable for actions I haven't taken. Please consider this thoroughly before making any judgments, parents. Mom answered, "We will, sweetheart," but it was obvious from her tone whose side she supported. I drove home after bidding my folks farewell and ignoring my sister and her husband. The sinking sensation in my gut persisted. I was fully aware of what would occur. Jessica would manipulate while crying. I would somehow be the bad person for attempting to avert a catastrophe, and my parents would cave in. I was in the middle of a work presentation when my phone called 3 weeks later. I chose to ignore it, but I quickly excused myself when it rang again. "Hi there, Victoria." My father was using my entire name. He sounded worn out. "We provided funding for Jessica and Ryan's business." I shut my eyes, with their backs to the wall. "What is the amount the residence was refinanced by us?" $200,000. "Dad?" "Jesus? Everything will be well. Their business plan is good. Jessica showed us everything." I wagered my tongue not to express my true feelings. "I'm hoping it goes well." I hung up and went back to my meeting after saying that. My parents mortgaged their home about a year ago today. At 11 p.m., my doorbell rang. Tuesday evening. I had not yet fallen asleep. I'm sitting on my couch reviewing some work materials. My parents were waiting there when I answered the door, appearing 10 years older than they actually were. Dad appeared smaller, seemingly stooped down with a vacant expression in his eyes, while Mom's eyes were swollen from sobbing. Mom murmured, hardly raising her voice above a whisper, "We lost the house." I wanted to, but I didn't say "I told you." But I was halted by the shattered expressions on their faces. Instead, I stepped aside and said, "Come in." I offered them my extra bedroom that evening. We didn't communicate much. The basic minimum was what they told me. After 8 months, Jessica and Ryan's store had collapsed. Overpriced products, an absurd lease, and a few business visits to fashion shows that were actually simply lavish holidays blew up the funds. My parents were unable to make the bank-assigned mortgage payments when the firm failed. Take note of that morning. I contacted my boss the next day and asked to work from home. I assisted my parents in bringing over the little items they were permitted to remove from the house by the bank. Some outfits, family pictures, Mom's china, which her mother had given her as a wedding present. It's only a temporary situation. As we moved boxes into my rented home, Dad continued to say, "Only until we are able to stand again." I nodded because I didn't think I could talk without saying something I would later regret. Another surprise was released 2 weeks later. The automobile of Jessica and Ryan was in my driveway when I got home after a rare day at work. Ryan was slumped next to my sister, who was seated at my kitchen table as if she owned the space. With a stiff smile that stopped short of her eyes, Jessica remarked, "There she is. What's happening?" I put down my laptop bag and asked. Mom came out carrying a cup of tea from the kitchen. "Ryan and Jessica need somewhere to stay for a while. They were evicted by their landlord due to non-payment of rent. You also assured them that they were welcome to stay at my residence." I made an effort to speak clearly. Dad replied from the living room, staring at the TV, "We're family, Tori. Families remain united." I turned to face my sister. I knew her well enough to realize it was an act, but she had the grace to at least look a little embarrassed. "We'll assist," she pledged. "Mom will prepare meals for everyone and I will clean. You won't even be aware of our presence." How might I proceed? Put my family on the streets because they are homeless. I so accepted their agreement. The cooking would be done by Mom. On the weekends, I would buy food for everyone while Jessica cleaned. Ryan and Dad would. They didn't really offer to do anything, though. The initial month was doable. Dinner would be cooked when I got home because I worked late most evenings anyhow. After sharing a meal and engaging in awkward small chat, everyone would withdraw to their designated areas. In the extra room are my parents. Me and my bedroom, Jessica and Ryan in the renovated den. For 5 adults, the home was modest, but we managed. Cracks, however, began to appear during the second month. The supper dishes would be in the sink unwashed when I got home. Mom said that cooking for 5 was too much labor for her at her age and stopped doing it. Upon my arrival, I discovered that my parents had prepared their own meal and Jessica and Ryan had followed suit. I used the groceries I paid for to make both dinners. In the meantime, I had nothing left. When I went home from work after the third consecutive night of discovering an empty refrigerator, I first ate at the cafe next to my workplace before going home. I didn't need the extra cost, but it was preferable to starvation. The cleaning that Jessica pledged to do on the weekends got increasingly irregular. She had an explanation for everything. Her new part-time work had left her exhausted. She was suffering from a headache. In order to network for greater job chances, she was making acquaintances. I'd had enough one Saturday morning in the midst of the third month. I spent the weekend reading a novel that I had been attempting to complete for weeks rather than going to the grocery store like I usually did. The refrigerator was empty when my family got back from seeing some relatives in the afternoon. Not knocking, Mom barged into my room. She replied accusingly, "There is no food in the house. Saturday is here. On Saturdays you always go shopping." Today I made the decision not to. I spoke in a relaxed tone. "When did you intend to inform us that we were hungry?" I put down my book. "Purchasing groceries that vanish before I can consume them is something I'm sick of. Everyone is now able to purchase their own meals." Mom's face became frighteningly crimson. "Following everything that we have done for you." "Done for me," I interrupted her. "My residence is yours without any rent. I only requested that Jessica clean and you cook. These two things are no longer occurring." Then she turned and bounded off. In the living room, I could hear her grumbling to Dad and Jessica, who were raising their voices in outrage. I returned to my reading after plugging in my ears. For a week, they were treated in silence. It seemed innocent, yet somehow serene. I purchased a little mini fridge from my bedroom and filled it with my own groceries. No one talked to me as I entered and departed from the residence. The Cold War in my home eventually subsided. One evening, while I was carrying my takeaway food to my room, my mother came up to me. "Can we discuss Victoria?" As usual, when she was attempting to seem serious, she requested using my entire name. After giving her a nod, I went to the kitchen table with her. Ryan, Dad, and Jessica were already seated there, all of them wearing serious expressions. "We have been considering." Mom began looking around for encouragement from the others. "Lately, things have not been going well." Jessica said, "We want to fix it," in a softer than normal voice. "We are aware that we haven't been doing our share." I arched an eyebrow but said nothing. "We would wish to return to our initial setup." Mom went on. "On the weekends, Jessica will clean and I will prepare dinner for everyone. Whether you'll resume your grocery shopping." I looked at their faces to see whether they were honest. Dad was unable to look me in the eye. Ryan was using a paper napkin as a fidget. Jessica was trying her hardest to appear apologetic, but I could see the thought process behind her face. "What caused the abrupt change of heart?" I inquired. Mom added, "We missed being a family. Furthermore, none of us can afford to continue purchasing food separately." That was at least truthful. I thought about what I could do. In all honesty, I missed eating healthy home-cooked meals, and although the quiet treatment was soothing, it was also isolating. "All right, I did agree at last, but that's it if things go wrong again. Not even in my own house will I be exploited." They all gave enthusiastic nods. In a matter of weeks, we were back to our previous arrangement. Everything went without a hitch. Mom prepared filling meals. On the weekends, Jessica did a complete cleaning, and I made sure the refrigerator was filled. It was bearable, but we weren't exactly the Brady Bunch. Then one early November evening, I sensed a change in the air. When I got home, the dinner table was already occupied by Mom, Dad, Jessica, and Ryan, but they all became silent as soon as I walked in. As I cleaned my hands and hung up my coat, they looked at each other. "What's happening?" I sat down at the table and inquired. Mom smiled too brightly as she presented the lasagna she had prepared. "All we were discussing was Thanksgiving." "Isn't it just 2 weeks away?" Taking the platter, I said. She gave me a hand. "I should be able to assist with the cooking on the day of the event, but I have to work the day before." Around the table, there was another round of stares. In fact, Jessica remarked, putting her fork down. This year, we were considering doing something new. We reasoned that taking a little trip could help us decompress in light of everything that has transpired this year. I went on vacation to this beautiful lodge in Sedona around midnight. Dad exclaimed, becoming passionate all of a sudden. All the classic Thanksgiving fare is included in their special package, but none of the work. In addition, there is hiking and spa services. The pieces seem pricey. Glancing around the table, I made a statement. The sound of forks hitting plates was the only sound to break the silence once more. When no one spoke, I asked, "Do you want me to accompany you? Because as I already stated, I have employment that week." Oh, Jessica responded hastily. We know you can't come. We thus believe that now would be the ideal moment for us to go. You don't regret missing it. Then I put down my fork. As everyone knows, I am unable to attend. Why are you sharing this trip itinerary with me? More awkward quiet. Do you want me to cover the cost? Flatly, I replied. A dawn of realization. That's the point of this. Mom touched my hand as she reached across the table. Not cover the cost. That's right. Just lend a hand a bit. Everyone needs a vacation. It's been a really difficult year, Tori. You want me to pay for a trip that I will never take? You can afford it. With a trace of her typical entitlement returning to her voice, Jessica said, We are all aware of your income. The point isn't that, I responded as my blood pressure increased. The point is that you want me to cover the cost of a lavish vacation for 4 individuals who don't make any financial contributions to this home. We are related. As if that clarified anything, Dad remarked. I'm not growing any younger, and neither is your mother. Ryan and I are still getting back on our feet financially, and we deserve to enjoy our golden years. Jessica also said, Years may pass before we can get back on our feet. I took a look at each one in turn. It seems like these individuals simply view me as an ATM, even if they were meant to adore me. I will no longer cover your vacation expenses. You'll be responsible for covering the cost if you choose to spend Thanksgiving at a resort. We can't afford it, though. Jessica got going. I cut you off so you can't leave. That's the way money functions. You cannot have anything if you cannot afford it. For the first time, Ryan spoke out and remarked, That's selfish. Following everything that your family has done for you? I let out a brief, sour laugh. What specifically have you done recently for me rent-free housing at my home? Consume the meal I have paid for. Don't hesitate to take advantage of my kindness. We brought you up, Mom, she added, her voice shaking with either real passion or a strong act. I've been making payments on the debt we made for you for months. But I draw the line at funding luxury vacations, I responded. The remainder of the meal was spent in icy quiet. I excused myself as soon as I was done eating and locked the door behind me as I walked to my room. In the living room, I could hear them conversing in quiet, irate tones, but I turned on my television to block them out. All of them continued to ignore me the following morning. I arrived at work and concentrated on the large project I was in charge of. This became my new habit of staying late to avoid returning home to the poisonous environment. Late evenings and early mornings. I don't spend much time with my family. A week went by in this manner. The household tension was getting intolerable. No one was talking directly to me, however, sometimes when I entered a room, I heard people whispering to each other, and when they saw me, they stopped talking. A week prior to Thanksgiving, I worked past my regular hours at the office one evening to complete a project that needed to be finished before the holiday. It was almost midnight when I was done. There was nobody in the office. I was worn out after the cleaning crew had arrived and left. I just wanted to go home, get into bed, and take a nice shower. The streets were deserted at that hour on a weekday, and the trip home was peaceful. All of the lights in the home were off when I pulled into my driveway. It must be a relief to think that everyone was asleep. Tonight, avoid unpleasant situations. With my house key in hand, I approached the front door and inserted it into the lock. It refused to turn. I thought it could be trapped, so I tried again, gently wriggling it. Nothing has changed. I took out the key and examined it in the porch light. Without a doubt, it was the home key I had been using for the previous 12 months. I came to the knowledge at that point. The locks had been replaced. When no one replied, my disbelief rapidly gave way to rage, and I began hammering on the door. I kept pressing the doorbell until the bells merged into a single grating sound that would undoubtedly wake everyone inside. Nothing has changed. Then I caught a glimpse of movement behind the drapes. Someone was awake and at home observing me without responding. It was the door I banged on. You're in there, I know that. Now, open the door. No answer. I took a step back, gazing up at the second story. Someone peered through the blinds in my parents' room and the light flickered for a moment. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. My mom sent me a text message. Until you agree to cover the cost of our trip, we won't allow you in. It's for your own benefit. Victoria, you must learn to be less self-centered. I couldn't comprehend what was occurring, so I just gazed at the message. I was locked out of my own home by my own family. I was extorted out of money by the residence I was paying for. I had the option to contact the police. I mean, that was my home. Something stopped me even though my name was on the lease. It could have been the final vestige of my familial ties, or perhaps it was simply fatigue. Rather, I went back to my vehicle, cranked up the heat, and made every effort to get into the driver's seat. The chill seeped in any time the engine shut off to conserve petrol, interrupting the fits of sleep. I woke up before morning shivering and completely rigid. I watched as individuals moved behind the drapes and the house's lights turned on. While I sat locked out in my car, morning procedures were taking place inside my house. At 7 o'clock, my mother emerged as the front door opened. Her smile made my blood boil as she walked up to my car. Just enough for me to hear her. I rolled down the window. "Have you had a chance to consider what we discussed?" As though she hadn't had me spend the night in my car, she requested in a friendly manner. Slowly, despite the restless night, I nodded, my thoughts suddenly clear. "I have indeed." She grinned broadly. "Excellent. After that, you are free to return inside." Stretching my sore back, I got out of the car and followed her to the front door. Ryan, Jessica, and my father were eating breakfast at the kitchen table inside. As I entered, their looks a mix of smugness and fake worry. They glanced up. "Good morning, drowsy head." Jessica grinned as she spoke. "Do you want pancakes?" I didn't answer. Rather, I went directly by them to my bedroom and shut the door. I informed my manager over the phone that I had to take a personal day due to family obligations. He was sympathetic. I seldom ever took a vacation. After that, I waited as I heard my family preparing for work. They walked out of the home one by one. Mom and Dad work part-time jobs. Ryan and Jessica to their daily activities. At 9 o'clock, the home was finally deserted. I hurried out of my closet. I took out the luggage I had saved from my previous trip. I carefully packed essential papers, clothing, toiletries, and a few sentimental objects. The rest might be swapped out. I then gave my landlord a call. "My lease must be terminated," I informed him. "Is there a problem with the house?" His voice was worried as he inquired. "It's a family matter, no?" I had to leave. I gave a quick explanation, omitting the more embarrassing aspects. "Although the lease permits termination with 30 days notice, if you would allow me to go immediately, I will pay the whole amount due for the next month." He was surprisingly sympathetic. "If necessary, keep your family there until the end of the month. I'll take over after that." "No, fine, thank you," I remarked, truly appreciative. "Would you please do me another favor? Would you be able to inform them today? I would prefer not to engage in that discussion personally." "Of course," he said. "I will visit this afternoon." After it was resolved, I packed my car as full as possible with the heavier stuff. I made arrangements for a tiny unit by calling a storage provider. I then sent a text to my buddy Emma, who lived on the other side of town. She offered her guest room as soon as possible for as long I needed it. I had left by early afternoon. Nothing that I couldn't live without was left behind. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt a weird lightness as I drove away. The duties and expectations of my family were not weighing heavily on me. The calls and texts began to pour in that night. My parents and Jessica's texts, which ranged from irate accusations to heartfelt entreaties, were continuously buzzing on my phone. I turned off my phone altogether after ignoring them all. The receptionist at work contacted my office the next day. "Your relatives have come to visit you." They were waiting in the foyer as I came downstairs. Mom is weeping. Jessica's hands were wringing, and Dad was grasping his chest dramatically. I ushered them out to converse. They pled and begged, vowing to change so as not to cause a scene in front of my coworkers. When the landlord evicted them at the end of the month, Mom cried because they had nowhere to go. Even I was amazed at how detached I listened to it all. When they eventually ran out of things to say, I answered with a composure I was unaware I had. "This is what you selected." I informed them that you forced me to sleep in my car after locking me out of my own house. Now you may do the same. I had moved into a new apartment across town 2 weeks later. I had deleted them from my social media accounts and banned their phone numbers. The landlord acknowledged that they had moved out, thus I need a new place to live. For the first time since I became an adult. I had no one to please except myself, so I was really on my own. Now that I wasn't having to support 4 more individuals, my savings account started to increase once again. Perhaps sooner rather than later, I would have enough for a down payment on my own house. I occasionally questioned whether I had been too severe in severing their connection. However, I would then recall the night I spent in my car shivering. The years of being second best, the months of being used. And I was certain that I had